Good evening, I'm Andrew Chang.
And I'm Adrian Arsenault. Tonight, more despair for Afghanistan. Suicide bombers strike an already chaotic and vulnerable Kabul, killing dozens.
We will hunt you down and make you pay.
The bitter sadness of those who say Canada failed them.
My soul, I'm not the same person.
Also tonight, as the federal campaign heats up, Quebec's premier flexes.
They don't want to be in a fight with the popular premier.
Rosemary and At Issue have all the election politics.
The pressure mounts in Ontario for a vaccine passport.
We have to protect not only ourselves, but all those people around us.
And for their family, the pandemic brought a birth and a death.
Never got to be held by him.
Joy and loss in a reunion delayed. This is The National. Death and destruction hit hard in Kabul's crowded streets, as if the people of Afghanistan haven't endured enough. But for a country already reeling, a city already in turmoil, today an exclamation point of chaos. 2 suicide bombers and a number of gunmen attacked crowds outside the airport. At least 60 Afghans are dead, along with at least 13 American service members. U.S. officials say they believe an ISIS-affiliated group in Afghanistan is responsible.
So let's take a closer look at that area outside the airport in Kabul, where for days, thousands have been hoping to get on flights out of the country. One explosion happened here at the Abbey Gate. That is a main entrance to the airport, and many people had been told to go there. The other blast occurred less than 2 kilometers away at the Baron Hotel. That's where others looking to leave were having their cases processed.
Now, the impacts will be felt in the streets of Kabul and around the world. Carolyn Dunn begins our coverage tonight with what we know about the attack and a promise from the U.S. that those behind it will pay.
The casualty count among Afghans mounts by the hour. Hundreds dead and injured in an attack international forces had warned was imminent. The suicide bombers believed to be blending in with the crowds of those trying to get into the airport. After the 2 deadly explosions, a hail of gunfire for maximum damage. It was a powerful suicide attack, this witness says. Many were killed, including Americans. Along with U.S. soldiers who are dead, more than a dozen injured.
We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
U.S. President Joe Biden vowed there will be a response.
I've also ordered my commanders to develop operational plans to strike ISIS-K assets, leadership, and facilities.
This attack is one too many.
But the Pentagon revealed there are still credible threats of more attacks from ISIS. So the U.S. is taking the enemy of my enemy is my friend approach, sharing limited intelligence with the Taliban.
We share versions of this information with the Taliban so that they can actually do some searching out there for us, and we believe that some attacks have been thwarted by them.
For now, the Taliban, an avowed enemy of ISIS, has similar goals.
Targeting innocent civilians is an act of terrorism. As soon as the airport situation is figured out and the foreign forces leave, hopefully we will not have such attacks anymore.
Playing nice with the Taliban does have conditions. NATO allies continue to demand they commit to giving safe passage to anyone who wishes to leave, even after the U.S. evacuation mission officially ends.
Okay, so Carolyn, is there any indication when we can expect that promised response from the U.S.?
Well, Andrew, Biden said the response would happen, quote, at the place we choose and at the moment of our choosing. He also said if that meant mobilizing more troops for that response, he's going to do whatever it takes. That, of course, as the U.S. continues to stick stubbornly to its deadline of being out of Afghanistan by next Tuesday.
Carolyn Dunn, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For more on this, I spoke not long ago with Matthew Aikens from the New York Times. He's from Halifax, but he lives in Kabul right now and says he heard a telltale popping sound and knew it meant an explosion. So he got on a motorcycle and went to the airport. I caught up with him on a slightly unstable line in a deeply unstable place. It's a terrible thing to come across, and I'm wondering what struck you about it when you were there.
Well, it's just such a terrible place for something like this to happen because people were packed in like sardines. You know, they were cramming up to these gates, trying to get to soldiers, desperately show them some scrap of paper, their documents, their passports, in the hopes of being let into the airport so they could be evacuated. So you imagine throwing a suicide blast in that mix, you're going to have a devastating number of casualties, which is what's happened today.
Who is there to help people, sort of medically and in that moment? Are there any foreign military on the ground still who are making themselves known at all?
There's no foreign military outside the airport, but there is an NGO called Emergency, which provides free medical care. They have a trauma hospital in Kabul, and that's where I went after the explosion happened. They were bringing in just ambulance after ambulance full of casualties, some of them little children. They were coming in with the eyes of a very anxious crowd, relatives weeping on the sidelines.
And have you seen or encountered any Canadians or anyone with Canadian documentation or any status in Canada just in the course of your reporting?
I know I have friends who work for Canadian media organizations who are promised visas to Canada and who haven't made it out because the evacuation has been such a shambles and because it was so last minute. And you know, I want to add actually that Canada's announcement, the very late announcement of 20,000 places for Afghans, which came at the final hour in a way that couldn't possibly be fulfilled in the timeless evacuation. I really think that was one of the key sparks for this kind of mass panic where you had tens of thousands of Afghans descending on the airport. I was hearing from people that Canada was going to airlift everyone. So the ways that countries just announce these kind of programs at the last minute without any real possibility or plan to actually bring that number of people, I think is partly responsible for the kind of chaos, panic, and ultimately death and suffering that we've been seeing at the airport.
So Matthew Aikens with New York Times in Kabul, that last point he made is one we will continue to discuss.
Now, Canada's evacuation mission did end just hours before the attacks. Officials say in the past few weeks, Canadian forces have airlifted out more than 3,700 people, but many who had been promised a way out, as you just heard, are being left behind. Stephen D'Souza hears from some tonight who say Canada abandoned them.
They waded through sewage and didn't get out. Now some Afghans who hoped Canada would take them see not just soldiers, but an entire country turning its back on them.
I'm feeling very exhausted. We are in a situation, the words cannot describe it.
This devastating news came in an email. Evacuation operations from Afghanistan have now ended. At this time, no further evacuation flights are being planned. Among those left behind, Canadian filmmaker Nargis Osman. She says she's lost confidence in the Canadian government.
Their actions have really spoken, and they're not able to help us out, and it's very disheartening as a Canadian.
Disheartening too for this contractor who is trying to stay strong for his family.
I'm just keeping myself, acting myself as calm, as normal, but in my soul, I'm not the same person.
Adding to his pain, that devastating attack was at the very spot near the airport that days earlier, many like him were told was their path to freedom.
I'm telling our Prime Minister, the Canadian Prime Minister, that you didn't done 100%. You were busy with your election, or you just ignored us.
We stayed in Afghanistan for as long as we could.
With the U.S. pulling out in days, Canadian officials said they had no choice.
We wish we could have stayed longer and rescued everyone who was so desperate to leave. That we could not is truly heartbreaking.
Those remaining now look to the border with Pakistan as one of their few remaining options.
There are some, but they are too dangerous to escape from Afghanistan.
And just how many are left in this perilous limbo? The government at this point can't say for sure. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, Kabul may be 10,000 kilometers away from Ottawa, but as David Cochran shows us, the chaos and violence over there is being reflected on right here in the middle of the election campaign.
The humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan creating a political crisis in Canada, forcing Justin Trudeau to defend a record that's changing in real time.
So where is your personal responsibility for this fiasco?
We know how incredibly difficult this moment is, because Canadians have been working unbelievably hard to get as many people out as we possibly could.
Working hard, but too slowly, says the Conservative leader.
Mr. Trudeau has wasted months with inaction and has now put us into an election when the situation has been in chaos.
As proof, Aaron O'Toole released a letter he wrote to Trudeau on July 22nd, warning as Afghan interpreters plead for assistance, your government remains silent. But the very next day, July 23rd, the government launched a special immigration program for Afghan interpreters that had been in the works for weeks. The Liberals insist they were on this early, but it wasn't until last week that the first Canadian rescue flight carried people out of Kabul. Canada's efforts did get thousands to safety, but thousands more got left behind.
It's sad to say that Canada has failed, and Justin Trudeau knew about this problem, knew about the concerns, and didn't act in a timely way.
This particular moment is done, and it's heartbreaking to see, but there is much more to do, and Canada will continue to be there for Afghans and the Afghan people.
What's missing from all parties are clear answers as to what that looks like. With the U.S. pulling out, there is no realistic military option for Canada. And all parties are refusing to recognize a terrorist organization like the Taliban as a legitimate government, which limits the diplomatic options. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, Afghanistan is just one issue on the minds of voters. CBC News has reporters following the campaigns, which today were focused on economic challenges in this country. Let's start with Tom Perry in Winnipeg with the NDP.
Jagmeet Singh focused on housing today. Campaigning in Winnipeg, Singh promised to rein in the skyrocketing price of homes in Canada. He said he would double the first-time home buyers credit, make it easier for friends and roommates to pool their cash and buy homes jointly, and impose a 20% tax on foreign buyers.
We don't want a Canadian to have to compete with a multinational corporation that looks at the Canadian housing market as an opportunity to make money. That should not be the way things happen, and we're seeing that.
Singh also took time to meet with Indigenous leaders. Indigenous voters are a powerful force here in Manitoba, where in this election the NDP is hoping to make gains.
I'm Evan Dyer with Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole, who said today that if elected, his party will bring in an employee savings account for gig workers who don't have access to employment insurance or the Canada Pension Plan.
The gig economy didn't exist years ago when EI and other programs were rolled out. And that's why 1.7 million Canadians were missed in a crisis.
The O'Toole campaign says the accounts would be portable and would be allowed to grow tax-free, but gig employers would also have to contribute. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business is calling the plan worrisome, saying it looks like something pulled from a union wish list.
I'm Rafi Boudjikanian with the Liberal leader in Quebec. Justin Trudeau announced $500 a year in guaranteed income supplements for seniors living alone, $250 more for couples.
Unfortunately, we know that for many, many seniors, every dollar counts. And that's been particularly clear during this pandemic, where our seniors have been unbelievably vulnerable.
The policy is a response to the Bloc Québécois, seen as the Liberals' main rivals in Quebec. For months, Yves-François Blanchet has criticized the Liberals for limiting top-ups to seniors 75 or older. Trudeau has to use his time here efficiently. It's his only day this week campaigning in a province that could be critical in this election.
Now, Quebec's premier knows how important his province is in this election, and today he let federal leaders know what Quebec would like. Alison Northcott takes us through it.
In this hotly contested Montreal riding, voters have a list of concerns.
Affordable housing, especially because now, as you might know, rents are high.
We have no doctor. You know, it's impossible to live in a country like Canada and to have no.
Today, as federal parties jostle for support in Quebec, Premier François Legault laid out his own list, 11 demands for federal leaders.
The first one is about health transfer. I think we have enough bureaucracy.
At the top, a no-strings-attached increase in federal health transfers, plus more power to choose which immigrants come into the province.
We need to make sure that there's an integration, that people coming in Quebec that they learn French. It's a question of survival.
I think Legault has a lot of sway with people who voted for Legault.
This political columnist says the Premier's top demands align closest to the Conservatives and the Blocs, but all the parties are paying attention.
Because everybody is very conscious that he's quite popular in a lot of regions in Quebec, and they don't want to be in a fight with the popular Premier.
Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole was quick to answer Legault, calling his demands clear, legitimate and reasonable.
Avec une demande claire.
Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet said his party would bring all of them to Ottawa, and the Liberals and the NDP say they're ready to work with Quebec. Legault is urging voters to pay attention to how federal leaders respond to his demands and to consider that when they're casting their ballots. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
In Ontario, the pressure is mounting on the government to introduce some form of vaccine passport. Premier Doug Ford has given no indication that he's ready to do that. But as Jayla Bernstein shows us, even one of his core constituencies says they want it.
It is a no-brainer.
These brothers say they're jealous of vaccine mandates in other provinces. They say a vaccine passport would let their pub keep serving even as cases rise.
As far as the hierarchy goes, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, gyms will all be the first to be shut before schools, before anything else. And we've just been battered the last 18 months.
Both Quebec and British Columbia are rolling out vaccine passports for non-essential venues like bars, restaurants, and movie theaters. Manitoba is expected to soon announce its version. So far, Premier Doug Ford has refused to jump on the bandwagon, but the pressure is mounting.
Our first and foremost request is really to have a provincial mandate in terms of mandating vaccines for non-essential places.
Ontario's regional medical officers of health are discussing the possibility of creating their own passport system if the province won't step up.
We are in the very early exploratory phases of trying to understand what our jurisdiction might be and also the nature of what a program might look like.
Much remains uncertain, even as cases and hospitalizations rise and families get ready for back to school.
I think we should start getting people onto that program, if people want to choose it, similar to how we have vaccination cards for the kids, and we can slowly ramp it up.
This woman says she's tired of the pandemic being politicized.
We owe it to frontline workers and we owe it to the restaurant people that are putting their lives on the line. Because every time we actually lock down, they lose, their livelihood.
That's exactly what the owners of this pub fear.
To be the first to fall on the sword again, it's unconscionable for us.
Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, CBC News election analysis shows just how much harder it is for diverse candidates to run.
Those are realities. People making comments about me being a Muslim.
Coming up, the extra hurdles facing people of color on the campaign trail. Plus,
could the chaos and violence at Kabul's airport hurt Trudeau's chances of winning? Rosie and At Issue are here.
And if you've never heard of Line Friends, we've got you. A superfan explains the hype and why she stood for hours at the pop-up. We're back in 2.
Welcome back. Federal parties are responding to a CBC News analysis of election candidates. We found that despite efforts to increase representation, more women, more people of color, more Indigenous candidates, white male candidates still have distinct advantages. Valerie Willette explains.
My suggestion would be we do that, frankly.
Door knocking, a rite of passage for every new election candidate.
I'm the Liberal candidate in the next election.
Businessman Talib Noor Mohammed is running for the Liberals for a third time, hoping this election will be different.
You start with the name, you start with the color of your skin, and those are realities. You know, people making comments about me being a Muslim. So you get, very Islamophobic comments.
CBC analyzed election data for thousands of past federal candidates. We found that white men ran more often in party strongholds and received more funding from parties than candidates who were racialized or Indigenous. In fact, more than 70% of candidates who ran in party strongholds were white men. Indigenous women faced the toughest odds. Only 1 out of every 8 were elected, compared to 1 out of every 3 white men who won their seat. Laurie Campbell ran for the NDP in Waterloo in 2019.
This election, I'm in it for you.
The Indigenous Two-Spirit academic ran to represent her communities, but says she quickly felt let down by her federal party.
It kind of felt like from federal leadership that it was a bit of a, they just kind of had decided how it was going to go and didn't put in the extra effort for me.
Our analysis also found merely having diverse candidates didn't always translate to seats. Take the NDP, the party with the most diverse nominations, at 25%. Still, most candidates who won were white. The Liberals had fewer candidates who identified as racialized and Indigenous, but more of them became MPs. Meanwhile, almost all the candidates who ran for the Conservatives were white men and women. Just 8% of their elected MPs were diverse candidates.
I think within all the parties to really clean up their houses, to really truly stand behind and invest in what they're saying that they are around diversity.
For Talib Noor Mohammed, that change comes one door and one voter at a time.
I think when you think about communities that somebody belongs to, right? I'm a tech entrepreneur, so there's that community. I believe in voluntary service. There's a whole voluntary sector to which I am a member of the community. All of those different elements of being part of a community are a big part of, I think, how we frame who we are and how we should frame who we are.
So, Valerie, how did the parties respond to the analysis of you and your team?
Well, the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives did not respond, but today Liberal leader Justin Trudeau did react. He said his party is committed to increasing candidate diversity, and he also acknowledged that those candidates need more resources so that they can not only represent but also win. Meanwhile, the NDP has made a significant change to its nomination process this election. Every time an incumbent quits or steps down, it is now mandatory for them to be replaced by a diverse candidate.
Interesting. Valerie, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Toronto's Ryerson University will be getting a new name. It is named after a man considered to be one of the primary architects of the residential school system. The board of directors agreed to change it, but are only expected to announce the new name next year.
A correction about a story we brought you last night about a COVID-19 outbreak at a basketball tournament. Leading into the story, we used an image of the Crestwood Preparatory College basketball team. That team did not participate in the tournament. We regret the error. As more Canadians get a chance to reunite, some journeys are filled with grief.
We're landing in Nova Scotia for the first time in my life that my father hasn't been there.
Coming up, a reunion changed by the loss of a loved one.
But first, Rosie is here with At Issue.
Hey, Andrew, tonight we're going to talk more about how the crisis in Afghanistan is overshadowing the message on the campaign trail.
We have been working day and night over the past months, past weeks and months to get as many people out as possible.
Could this influence how Canadians choose to vote? Chantal, Andrew, Althea, Elamine will join all of us right after the break. As the situation worsens on the ground in Afghanistan, Canada's response continues to overshadow the messaging on the campaign trail here at home, forcing the Liberal leader to answer questions as Prime Minister.
We have been working day and night over the past months, past weeks and months to get as many people out as possible.
While the leaders vying for his job are being asked to explain what they would have done differently.
We would have gotten people out before the chaos erupted. But like most issues, Mr. Trudeau is late, no leadership.
So what kind of political impact does this have on the leaders campaigning? It's Thursday, and I'm here with At Issue, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and Elamine Abdelmahmoud. Good to see you all. Obviously, this situation was unpredictable and basically came to a head today with the flights now shutting down and then the violence that has broken out. What does this mean, if anything, for the Liberals here, Chantal, do you think? And how does this play out through the campaign, or does it?
I can't speak about the rest of the campaign, almost a month, but it does hurt the Liberals on two scores. I think it makes the issue of why are we having an election campaign when all this is going on more of an issue than the Liberals should want. But it also, and I go back to the day when the election was called and the danger that there would be a disconnect between the images we would see out of Afghanistan and the Prime Minister going on his merry way campaigning and promising things that have little to do with Afghanistan. That's happening now, that gap between the campaigner and the reality of office that doesn't look like it's being filled.
Althea, what do you make? And the fact that we also had to leave so many people behind because of how quickly this all unfolded and how the situation was managed by the government.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Chantal's point, and we've talked about this, it's basically prevented the Liberal campaign from taking off because reporters keep asking questions about Afghanistan and rightfully asking questions about Afghanistan and not about the Liberals' announcement of the day. I think the risk is if we start seeing images that really directly connect the government's actions to the crisis. So if Afghan interpreters start getting murdered, if people with Canadian papers are found dead on the streets, I mean, that is really going to bring that home, and that could be the Alan Kurdi moment of the 2021 election campaign, and worse, actually. But I think on this issue, frankly, none of the opposition parties have a good answer either. I mean, for all of their complaints that, I would have led and I would have done things differently, when you actually look at the facts, nobody was really talking about this issue. The government did not do anything, and the Liberals could have brought in more Afghan interpreters earlier. But if you look at the record in the House of Commons, the last time anybody asked about this was in 2011, and it was Liberal MP Dominic LeBlanc wondering why the Conservatives were rejecting 2/3 of the Afghan appeals. And at that time, Jason Kenney, who was responsible for the government, responded that no, Canada had never made any promises to these people. So frankly, none of the opposition parties have a good record on this issue.
Okay, Andrew, how about you? How do you think it's being managed?
Well, that's as may be, but the government of the day is the government of the day, and it is the one that has responsibility for dealing with the situation that it finds. The collapse happened some days or weeks sooner than people anticipated, but everyone knew it was coming, has known it for months, has known it for years. So this is not just a matter of optics or politics. I'm sorry, it is. I have talked to people who have been involved in this file very closely.
Yeah.
And they are quite clear in saying that this was absolutely foreseeable. It was foreseen. People knew. So it's not just a matter of optics or politics. It's a matter that we've left behind thousands of people, including Canadian citizens, it appears, who are facing a very uncertain fate now. And whether or not the opposition parties would have done better or not, that can be debated. But what is certainly worth pointing out is holding the government of the day to account on that.
Maybe not years.
Yeah. Hang on one second. Okay. I'll just let Andrew and I just are going to quickly disclose two things around this situation. Andrew, I'll go to you first.
Yeah. So, I mean, my partner and I were involved in an effort to get some people out. We were successful, as it turned out, but we were among the fortunate few. And the other people that I have talked to who have been trying have met a uniform wall of difficulty and indifference and opaque communications and everything beyond that.
And I'll also just add that multiple news organizations, including this one, the CBC, also were working to get people out, people that were supporting our journalists during the conflict. And again, varying degrees of success there, just as Andrew said. Elamine, sorry.
The point that Andrew is making, I don't think it's true that people have been knowing that this is going to come for years, but certainly it's been months. Certainly like since maybe April or May, and certainly since Biden announced that the U.S. is going to pull out. You would expect that Canada would have mobilized to move a little bit faster on this, and they did not. And like that is something that is going to hang around Trudeau's neck this entire time. He keeps getting the question, how are you managing Afghanistan? And he keeps having to answer by saying, I'm campaigning just fine while managing that. Well, now it looks worse, and it's going to continue to look worse. But it's something that is in his favor, is that it is very early on in this campaign, and like we could be somewhere else 2-3 weeks from now. We could be talking about the Delta variant and not even remembering talking about Afghanistan. But as of right now, it's just a story that keeps coming back every day, right?
Okay, I do want to do a round on healthcare if I can, but just because it was a dominant theme already this week. And then today, the Quebec Premier François Legault shared his list of priorities for the federal parties. And one of them was, yes, obviously a healthcare transfer boost, but also please stay out of my business is basically what he said. I'll support parties that say that they're going to do that. Chantal, how do you read what the Premier said and how much healthcare is or will become an issue through this?
Whether it's an issue with voters remains to be seen. For sure, premiers are going to say, because that's been their position for a year and a half, that they want an increase in the transfer and not necessarily conditions and strings attached. I think the Liberals look weak on this as they are in attack mode because they seem to be over the years, and I've covered federal campaigns for too long now, probably, so I've seen this movie again and again. The Liberals are never more interested in the integrity, quote unquote, of the Medicare system than when they're campaigning for re-election. Okay. And the rest of the time, you rarely hear about it.
Andrew?
Yeah, the Liberals are shocked to discover that there are private clinics operating. They're particularly exercised about them in Saskatchewan, less so in Quebec. So it is a bit corny. I think, as Chantal said, we've seen this movie before. We've also seen the premiers crying poor about healthcare for many, many years. But that should not obscure that, in fact, you know, as I often say, the story of the boy who cries wolf ends with the wolf devouring the boy. We actually do have a healthcare funding crisis coming upon us because of the aging of the population. Yeah. But the discussion that has to begin is not just this annual thing of giving the provinces money, no strings attached, which therefore means no accountability either for it, but giving them the taxing powers to raise the funds themselves and be accountable to their own citizens for the results. So we've got to get out of this two-way blame game where, in the end, neither level of government gets properly held to account for the results.
Last word to Elamine. Althea, I'll start with you on the next round.
I just really appreciated that you called it a list of priorities and not a grocery list, because there's something about Legault's approach to just saying, you know what, there are many things that I'm asking for. And I mean, yes, it is about healthcare, but also this is about autonomy. And I think the idea of Legault feeling emboldened by his popularity to basically dictate his terms, that's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch. I was waiting for this to pop up. I thought it would pop up a little bit later on in the campaign, but here it is.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. We should point out that Andrew's dog really wanted to talk about healthcare too. You probably didn't know Andrew made an appearance just in the back. It was lovely and nice, refreshing to see. Okay, we'll be back with another round of At Issue. Althea will start us off on this question. Take a look.
Do you stand by your party's previous position that you would never prop up a conservative minority?
Okay, the NDP leader's response to that and the strategies during this week 2 of the campaign. That's coming up.
In a new Democrat government, as Prime Minister, whether it's a majority or a minority, we'll look at that when it happens and make decisions that are in the best interest of Canadians.
The NDP leader there leaving the door open to working with all parties, including the Conservatives, after he was asked this week whether his party would prop up a minority Conservative government, something that hasn't happened yet, but there it is. It's on the table. And we're pointing this out because Jagmeet Singh, he said he would not do that back in 2019. So what's behind the change? Chantal, Andrew, Althea, and Elamine back for another round. Althea, I said I'd start with you. So tell me what you made of that answer and what we should make of it.
I think the New Democrats around Jagmeet think that Aaron O'Toole is more palatable than Andrew Scheer. But more importantly, though, I would say that they want to keep their powder dry. If they find themselves in a situation where either the Conservatives or the Liberals can form government, ruling out voting or siding with the Conservatives basically means that they have no demands that they can place on the Liberals. And so it is strategically wiser for them to hold out that card so that they can extract any concessions from the Grits.
Chantal?
But there is a risk to that. You can either think that they have made Aaron O'Toole less scary by saying that, or else that they have made a lot of swing NDP Liberal voters realize that there is a possibility that the Conservatives will win the election. And a lot of voters on the left side of the spectrum have been operating under the assumption that their choice on September 20th was a minority or a majority Liberal government. Now they are being told in rather stark terms that their choice may be between a Conservative and a Liberal government. I can't tell you where the vote goes from there, but it is a risky move.
Elamine, your thoughts on that, and what you all seemed to agree on last week was that the Liberals were off to a slow start.
I mean, certainly it indicates on part of Jagmeet Singh that he wants to play ball this election. He's trying to increase his seat count. He's not trying to look like the guy who will just willing to prop up the Liberals at any cost. And you know what? That's a strong signal to send. But at the same time, like Chantal said, it does kind of have the inverse problem, which is that the Liberals can now go on the attack. I don't know when. I'm guessing that the Liberals will put this on the shelf, come back to it after Labor Day, and say, listen, the NDP are willing to work with the Conservatives. Now we are your only real choice. And there's a lot of hand-wringing among progressives in terms of saying, no, don't frame the choice like this. But in the end, they end up going back to the Liberal camp. So it might be something that is kind of dangerous for the NDP.
And is there no world in which the NDP could extract things from a Conservative minority government, Andrew? Is that just not a thing?
Oh, of course they could. Of course they could. Yeah. If this was the price of the Tories staying in power, they'd pay it. So no, I think the Tories and the NDP are objective allies. The Tories need the NDP to do well to cut votes away from the Liberals. Yeah. And the NDP, I think, as job one, needs to prevent the Liberals from doing the play they always do every election, which is demonizing the Tories and telling New Democrat waverers, you have to vote Liberal to stop the Tories, because the floods will rise and winged monkeys will fly over the earth if the Tories get in.
I see Chantal has things to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you believe, as the NDP has worked on for years, about that $10 a day childcare is more important than tax credits, that's also in the balance. And I suspect many in the Indigenous leadership do not believe that the NDP can have the Conservatives on the same track as the Liberals on the issue.
Last thought to you, Elamine. I have 10 seconds.
I mean, I do have to say that all credit here goes to Aaron O'Toole for making himself a different enough leader of the Conservatives that this is even on the table. I mean, like this was just not on the table 2 years ago. So I have to imagine that they're feeling pretty good about that one.
Okay, Toby the dog wants us to finish, so that's what we will do. Thank you, Chantal, Andrew, Althea, and Elamine. We'll see you next week. Thanks.
Okay, and Rosie, what are you working ahead on for this Sunday's Rosemary Barton Live?
We are going to talk more about Afghanistan, obviously, on the show, too, particularly what is going to happen now to the many thousands of people who were left back, who Canada didn't manage to get out, and the efforts that will be made to try and get them out. And we're also going to talk about healthcare, because that has become one of those dominant issues so far in this campaign. And we'll talk to the parties about who they think has the best plan going forward.
Okay, thanks, Rosie.
Thanks.
As travel opens up, many are able to reunite with their loved ones, but sometimes those journeys are bittersweet.
2 months after our son came into the world, my father passed away.
Coming up, one family travels east to say goodbye. We're back in 2.
And he's going to get past him, and that is the race. A phenomenal performance.
Well, Canada's Tristan Chernoff won silver in the men's C1 3,000-meter individual pursuit. It is the 46-year-old's fourth Paralympic medal, and it wasn't Canada's only medal on day 2 of the Games.
Glides to the wall and still smashes it by half a second almost. Turbine manages to upgrade a bronze previously to a very fine silver for Canada.
Quebec's Nicolas Guy Turbide brought home another silver with an impressive race in the men's S13 100-meter backstroke final. This is the 24-year-old's second Paralympic appearance. Well, tonight we are continuing a series here on The National about pandemic reunions, something the Rockwells have been waiting for a very long time. Now, after welcoming their second child into the world at the height of COVID, they share their new joy with family and grieve the death of one who didn't get the chance.
We're really looking forward to just giving somebody a proper hug again. I don't think I've so much as shaken another person's hand for 16 months now.
On the airplane.
On the way to Grandma's house.
Jasper, we made it.
I suspect that this will be kind of an emotional visit, and I expect it to be very apparent that we're landing in Nova Scotia for the first time in my life that my father hasn't been there. I'm Andrew Rockwell. I'm originally from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, but I live in Calgary.
And I'm Kimberly Rockwell. I'm originally from Ontario. For us, this pandemic has been especially challenging. Our son Jasper was born right at the height of the first peak.
We're used to living in Calgary on our own, but we're also used to traveling back and forth to the East Coast or having people come to visit us every couple of months. We certainly never thought that we would go, 16 months with a newborn baby without having family and friends to help us out.
Happy birthday to you. They kind of say like it takes a village to raise a child, and then during the pandemic, your village is like virtual.
It's been quite difficult seeing our children grow up and change, knowing that our parents' window to that is a computer screen. And realizing that our little boy Jasper only ever got to meet his papa through video call. Never got to be held by him. 2 months after our son came into the world, my father passed away in Nova Scotia of a heart attack unexpectedly. The initial reaction is, I need to hop on a plane and fly back to be there. It didn't take long to realize that the reality of the situation was that we were still learning more about the disease. It was still clear that travel wasn't recommended. We knew that we would not be able to have a funeral service.
And you would have either needed to isolate for 14 days alone, or like we would have all had to have flown there as a family and isolated.
It just wasn't a practical solution. It's been a year, and kind of as I was saying, we haven't really had the opportunity to like experience the emotions that come with losing somebody. It's just been such an odd experience going through that without the people I expected to go through that emotional journey with. I'm really looking forward to finally being able to formally lay my dad to rest, telling stories about his life, about all the times that he made us laugh or that he did wonderful things for us, and just seeing my mom playing with our kids and hearing them interact.
Are you guys eating strawberries with your Nana?
I'm also looking forward to being able to have our parents look after our kids for a night. We haven't had time to ourselves. We haven't been able to go on a date in 16 months. Dinner together, maybe having a glass of wine, going out for ice cream. Simple things that before the pandemic we might have taken for granted.
A lot of love in that family. Up next, as K-pop music gets more popular, the fans get more invested.
My friends and I decided to go down at midnight last night.
One superfan story, how she stood in line all night for a K-pop pop-up shop. Our moment is next. So there is a chance people near Toronto saw this massive line at a mall and wondered, what is that? Well, it turns out those were hundreds of superfans of the Korean pop band BTS, and they had some shopping to do. So one pop-up store, a collaboration between a Korean company called Line Friends and BTS, the fans could not believe their luck, and a super fan tells us why. She's our moment.
Line Friends and BTS, the K-pop band, made a creation called BT21 together. That was their collaboration. And they made this line of characters and toys. This morning was their opening launch. So my friends and I decided to go down at midnight last night. We just kind of like sat in the parking lot until this morning when they opened the doors. And the shop is just adorable. It's so cute. Obviously, I think they know that that's where the draw really is, are the BTS fans. You can see it every time that they have these pop-ups. They just sell out crazy. Even me leaving, I was like, oh my God, there's people like in the parking lot. It's like wrapping around. But I did end up buying like at least over like $200 worth of stuff. It was crazy, but I mean, it's not even the first time I've done this, so I'm not even like surprised.
Sorry. No, which was your favorite Line Friend character again?
You know what? There are just so many of them.
Too many to mention.
But you know what I want for Christmas now.
One of those things. Yeah, I mean, I'll admit there's a part of me that wonders, why can't you just order them online? Why do you have to wait so long? But I guess if it was the launch, the experience.
And I'm telling you, had the Bay City Rollers had a pop-up store, that would have been me.
That would have been your jam.
Yeah, that is a national for August 26th. Good night.
Good night.